This is an Oklahoma Freedmen History Moment. Do you know where your ancestors lived? We're going to take a look at the Skullyville Freedmen communities to exemplify how important it is to study exactly where your Freedmen ancestors lived. Once known as Isculi Town or Money Town, Skullyville for many years was known as a principal community in the northeastern part of the Choctaw Nation. The town itself disappeared but remained a district in the Choctaw Nation. Many people lived also prior to the Dawes Era Commission and prior to the Civil War. They lived enslaved in the Skullyville community, and a small number of them lived in the nearby Sugarloaf community as well. Early maps of Indian Territory reflect all of the districts, including Skullyville, and you can see other parts. Skullyville, of course, was part of the old Mushlet-Tubby district. There were other districts as well. The Pushmataha district, which consisted of Jacks Fork, Atoka, Blue, Jackson, and Kiamishi counties, and the Apushinabe district, which consisted of Wade, Tuskahoma, Neshoba, Alikchi, Towson, Botuklo, Eagle, and Red River. But the thing is most important, of course, is to remember that after freedom, many slaves remained in the district that had now become their home. That was what was familiar to them, and that was where their families remained, and many were buried there. So where did they live? In 1860, a count of the enslaved population was made, and this was recorded in the federal census. And for those of you who are active genealogists, you recognize this document known as a slave schedule. And as you can see, Skullyville enslaved people were counted. There were 51 slaveholders who were specifically in the Skullyville area. Among those 51 slaveholders, only 3 of them held more than 10 people in bondage. Many of the Skullyville slaveholders held sometimes one person enslaved, or in some cases, a small family group. The more populated slave communities, especially in the Choctaw Nation, were in the southern part of the nation near the Red River on the Texas border, where larger Southern-style plantations occurred. On this page of Skullyville slaves documented, on this document, you see one example of a slaveholder who did have more than 10 enslaved people. That was the plantation of Joseph R. Hall. As you can see, others in the family held an interest also in holding those individuals in bondage. It has to be mentioned that also it was on the Hall plantation in 1861, a year after this document was created, that a slave uprising occurred. This is right outside of the city in Arkansas, known as Fort Smith, and not too far away, many people rebelled and were trying to free themselves from bondage. After slavery ended in 1866, people remained in the territory. That was their home. Again, their families were born there, had died there, were buried there, and they had spent many decades prior to the Dawes era right there. The primary Skullyville residences where freedmen families have been found are Kavanaugh, Braden, Brazil, Mountain, Oak Lodge, and Walls. Some of the maps, as you can see, that southern right-hand portion of Indian Territory was the Choctaw Nation. Skullyville area, keep in mind, was in that northern part of the Choctaw Nation, next to Sam Boys, and of course to the south would have been, or a little bit south of Skullyville would have been Sugarloaf. But every map didn't always reflect all of those communities, but a map was later found that did. Now looking at this one map from 1889, Keep in mind again that part just outside of Fort Smith in the upper right-hand corner, which is, of course, you see that Arkansas state line. You see some of the communities where freedmen lived, but not all of them that have at least so far been documented on Dawes rolls. But there was a map that was actually created reflecting coal and asphalt segregation, but that particular map actually did reflect some of the residential communities. So a closer look has been taken. Now, looking so far at the number of freedmen households that have been found in those areas, you see Kavanaugh, Braden, Brazil, Mountain, Oak Lodge, and Walls. What strikes me is that, of course, Braden, which would be closest to Fort Smith, 25 different households so far of Choctaw freedmen. Now, I must add a point here. There were other Black families living in that same area, but some of them would later be classified as Chickasaw freedmen. They added to that population of Black people in that part of the Choctaw Nation. But specifically, since we are talking about those labeled as Choctaw freedmen specifically, there were those 25 families that were there. And of course, if you look right in the middle of the map, you see right underneath Brazil Creek, you see an actual community of Brazil. 37 families were documented there, labeled as Choctaw freedmen. And again, as I said, this is excluding some who may have been labeled at the time of the Dawes era as Chickasaw freedmen. In the middle at the top, you see Mountain Township, kind of an isolated community, only 5 freedmen families there. But look to the south, you see Oak Lodge, 32 families. It's a lot of different families all living in one small settlement. And of course, you do see the community of Spiro, which was not very large. This is the old, what would have been the old Skullyville town area. But it is pointed out, of course, now, but individuals who still live in that old area around Oak Lodge, you find people in now, it's not reflected on this map, but the community of Fort Coffee, for example, is right in that area, right outside of Spiro. But again, look over to the right, just of Spiro is Oak Lodge. Spiro is also highlighted because that's where the well-known Spiro Mounds are located, but some Choctaw freedmen lived there as well. And of course, at the bottom, you see Kavanaugh. You also see to the left, the farthest west in that community was a small community. 5 families so far have been documented in the Walls area. And I did draw a circle, a yellow circle, right where you see in the middle, south of Brazil, near the Poto Valley Railroad. See something in yellow. I just had to highlight it because right there on the map, there was probably a small creek. And as you can see, it was entitled with a racial epithet, but I had to certainly point it out because I know many viewers will see it. In the bottom right-hand corner, you also see what was actually part of the Sugarloaf community. Sugarloaf is a hilly area, and there were not many people who were freedmen who remained there. Many originally from Sugarloaf had migrated a little bit farther north towards what's now Pecola, towards Spiro, and other communities as well. It is very important to put your family history in both historical and geographic context. This small glimpse of freedmen locations in Skullyville is a mere example. Do you know where your ancestors lived? This has been an Oklahoma Freedmen History Moment. Thank you for watching.